distinguished with a commanding name.
Yeah, Adama, right? But no one is seeing that. So I'm going to just welcome everyone on the YouTube and Facebook feed here. Welcome everyone on Zoom. Welcome, welcome. We're so happy to have you. We are continuing another day of this series, speaking on the Blessed Beauty. The Blessed Beauty is a chronology put together and accessible on theutteranceproject.com. Theutteranceproject.com is spelled on the top of the screen here. You can see on the screen share above. Theutteranceproject.com is host to the chronology of the Blessed Beauty, which is the story of Baha'u'lláh, the chronology of the story of the Bab, Abdul-Baha, and what makes the utteranceproject.com a great website is that you can also read the writings of the Bab, Baha'u'lláh, Abdul-Baha in the original language and hear it as it's read out loud. And you can, if you can't read, obviously, I'm an English speaker, cannot read in Farsi and Arabic. I can actually see the subtitles where the words are read out loud, and I'm understanding what those words mean in my mother tongue. It's amazing. And that being said, I want to give a shout out to the wonderful Desert Rose Baha'i Institute. They have, with the Firm Foundation Academy Initiative, brought this and made this possible, working with Violetta and the Clearwater Baha'is. We are so thankful to all of these groups working together to support this, to make this presentation here happen. And most importantly of all, we thank Violetta for bringing this chronology together so we can not just read the story of Baha'u'lláh, we can watch the story of Baha'u'lláh in this way. And just to point out, for those of you who are just coming in now, you're welcome to join in where we left off, but we also invite you, please, to look at the videos in the playlist for the Blessed Beauty that is over the sessions that we've had since August 16. Today, it's August 24. So just doing the math, it is session 8. And if I can't do math, I'm sorry. But Jeremiah, can you clarify? This is session 8, yes?
9.
Session 9, you see? N plus 1. All right, I couldn't add there. Yes, it is session 9. So Violetta, we thank you and we look forward to the rest of this presentation. I'm just going to ask a question. Who's that guy in red here on the screen?
That is where we are starting. So I'm going to tell you exactly who he is. That's Nasruddin Shah. And this is an abstract piece of art that's meant to represent the blood on Nasruddin Shah's hands. So where we stopped yesterday is we looked at the voyage, the journey of Baha'u'lláh to Akká, and the prophecies that accomplished. But we also looked at the first year of Baha'u'llah's life in the Most Great Prison. And we ended with the arrival of Badi, who received the tablet, the Lahi Sultan, and handed it to Nasruddin Shah. That's where we closed yesterday. So we're picking up the story now, and we're talking about, before we talk about Badi's martyrdom, and the events after his martyrdom, we're going to talk a little bit about the proclamation of Baha'u'lláh to the ruler of his native land. The Lahi Sultan is a pivotal tablet because it signalizes Baha'u'llah's official public proclamation to the ruler of the land where he was born. And it is intended to introduce the faith of Baha'u'lláh in its truest light to the Persian people. For 20 years, this Persian population had witnessed the heroism of first Babi and then Baha'i martyrs. They had witnessed their extraordinary devotion and self-sacrifice, but they still did not know 20 years later the difference between the Babi and Baha'i revelations. The moment Badi handed the Lahi Sultan to Nasruddin Shah was the moment that the Baha'i faith, its teachings, its principles, and Baha'u'llah's claim were publicly, clearly, and openly stated. Baha'u'lláh affirms himself that the delivery of the Lahi Sultan fulfilled God's testimony and declared the conclusive proofs of his faith. Baha'u'lláh states that after the proclamation of his message to Nasruddin Shah and through the sovereign of Persia to the people of that land, there was no excuse left for anyone not to recognize the cause of God. In this tablet, Baha'u'lláh comments on the inevitability of God's punishment, stating believers should meditate as to why the wrath of God allowed the Shah respite while it rained down on his people so mercilessly. Immediately after handing the tablet to the Shah, Badi was marching towards his martyrdom. And here is Badi himself, a few days before he was martyred, chained during his torture and photographed by a court photographer sent by the Shah. The brazier used to torture Badi is visible in this photograph. Badi was taken into custody and interrogated by Kazim Khan-i Turk, also known as Kazim Khan, the Farash Bashi of the Shah, the executioner. Badi answered every question he was asked, volunteering details. When he was repeatedly asked to surrender the names of the Persian Bahais, Badi truthfully answered each time that he didn't know any. If you remember, he was converted in a single night to the Baha'i faith by Nabil and left immediately. So he would not have had contact with the Persian Bahais. When Kazim Khan threatened to kill him, Badi replied, "I am longing to be put to death. Do you think that you frighten me?" Kazim Khan tried torturing Badi and ordered 6 men to take turns whipping the soles of his feet, but Badi never cried or begged. Kazim Khan ordered him tortured by branding a red-hot iron on his back and chest, but Badi laughed. His courage and strength astonished his executioners and piqued the Shah's curiosity, who sent his court photographer to take pictures of Badi being tortured. These photographs are the ones we are painfully familiar with. Badi kneeling and chained, surrounded by his torturers and executioners, with a peaceful, serene expression on his youthful face. In the end, Kazim Khan had Badi's head smashed to a pulp. Divine retribution for the martyrdom of Badi. Photograph you're looking at is a famine in Persia from another time. It's the daily sheep kill at Bihar, the small party of starving men and women fighting for the entrails of a butchered animal during the Persian famine of 1917. A few months after Badi's sacrifice, 15 million people, between 15 and 25% of the population of Persia, died in the Persian famine of 1870 to 1872. The effect of the Persian famine was so devastating that the future hand of the cause, Haji Akund, wrote Baha'u'lláh a letter begging for relief in their sufferings. Baha'u'lláh replied to Haji Akund that the famine was God's punishment for the martyrdom of Badi, declaring he had prophesied afflictions in his tablets, and that were it not for the Bahais, the entire nation would have been struck down by God's wrath. Baha'u'lláh responded favorably to Haji Akund's intercession and assured him that God would soon grant them relief and the situation would be improved. The fate of Kazim Khan, the Shah's executioner and the murderer of Badi, was grim. A year and a half after he had ordered Badi so cruelly executed, he went mad. The Shah had him chained and he died miserably. For 3 years, Baha'u'lláh would reveal tablets in praise of Badi, and you see here the grave top and the resting place on the left of Badi, the pride of martyrs, near Tehran. For 3 full years after the martyrdom of Badi, Baha'u'lláh sang his praises in almost every tablet he revealed, extolling his courage, uprightness, purity, fidelity, trustworthiness, and his indomitable strength. Baha'u'lláh gave Badi the title of Fakhrush Shuhada, the pride of martyrs, and designated the tablets he revealed during this period as the salt of my tablets. In one of these tablets, Baha'u'lláh states that he recreated Badi by taking a handful of dust, mixing it with the waters of power and might, breathing into it a new spirit from his presence, and adorning him with a new name in the kingdom of creation, Badi, meaning wonderful. In another tablet, to Haji Abdul Majid Ishal Furush, the father of Badi, Baha'u'lláh recounts in moving language his interactions with his son in the most great prison, stating he uttered one word to Badi, which made his whole being tremble, and that only divine protection had prevented him from fainting. Baha'u'lláh affirms that Badi was infused with so much might from God that he could have conquered the world had he been ordered to do so. Baha'u'lláh testifies that when Badi came into being as a new creation, he smiled in his presence and manifested such steadfastness that the conquerors on high were exhilarated, and the voice of God was heard calling aloud, "Hallowed and glorified be Baha, for having fashioned a new and wonderful creation." In an arresting passage, Baha'u'lláh states that he disclosed to Badi's eyes the kingdom of revelation, which caused his whole being to fill with an ecstasy that rid him of all attachments to this world and made him arise to assist his Lord and bring victory to the cause. In the same tablet, Baha'u'lláh states that the temple of the cause of God, referred to in the Suri Haikal, was adorned by Badi, whose station was so exalted that no pen could describe it. He also states that through Badi, the pillars of tyranny were shaken, and the countenance of victory unveiled itself, and affirmed that Badi attained such heights in the next world that no mention could be made of it. In yet another tablet, Baha'u'lláh states he offered up the life of Badi after having recreated him with the hands of might and power, and sent him into the mouth of a serpent to assure the peoples of the world that the Almighty God stands transcendent and supreme over his creation. Referring to the Lahi Sultan, Baha'u'lláh describes dispatching Badi with a book in which he proclaimed his cause and gave his conclusive proofs to all humanity, after having removed all trace of fear from Badi, adorning him with the ornament of faith and power, setting his soul on fire with the utterance of a single word, and sending him out as a ball of fire to proclaim his cause. After the martyrdom of Badi comes a period where there is a change in attitude towards Baha'u'lláh between 1869 and 1870. This is the same photograph, on the left black and white and on the right colorized, to show the change in attitude in a symbolic way of the governor of Akká and the barrack staff towards Baha'u'lláh and the Baha'i faith. Not long after the exiles' arrival, the Greek physician, Dr. Brutus Peter, had befriended the exiles, and after conducting his own investigations into their character, assured the governor that the prisoners were noble people and not the vile criminals that they had been misrepresented to be. A year after their arrival, though nothing had outwardly changed in the Sultan's strict edict, the Ottoman officials in Akká found themselves increasingly disinclined and sometimes unable to maintain the harsh measures they had initially adopted in their treatment of Baha'u'lláh and the prisoners. The transformation in the attitudes of the prison officials was remarkable and due in large part to the irresistible charm of Abdul Baha's perfect character. As the months passed, they were equally won over by the inmates of the citadel, and aggression and hostility gave way to respect and reverence. Sometime before 1870, Abdul-Baha repairs the public bath for Baha'u'lláh. This is the interior of the public bath in Akká. Sometime between late 1868, when the restrictions were less severe, and 1870, when they left the Most Great Prison, Abdul-Baha managed to give Baha'u'lláh a meaningful gift, despite being penniless and under the strictest of imprisonments. He repaired the public bath so that his Lord and Father could bathe. Abdul-Baha took the initiative to refurbish the public bath, which was near the barracks and had fallen in a state of disrepair, and was able to offer Baha'u'lláh an essential dignity, which his heartless jailers had tried so hard to deprive him of. Abdul-Baha later recalled this gesture towards Baha'u'lláh, saying, "To bathe oneself is a great bounty. Near the army barracks in Akká, there existed a public bath, which was in a state of ruin. For the sake of the blessed beauty, I had it repaired." There were some Bahais in Akká. This is an 1891 photograph of the streets of Akká in Ottoman Palestine during the lifetime of Baha'u'lláh. When Baha'u'lláh revealed the untranslated tablet for the 9th day of Rizvan, 1869, there were already 2 Baha'is living in the city of Akká itself. Mirza Hadi, titled Abdul Ahad, was sent by Abdul-Baha before Baha'u'llah's exile and was the very first Baha'i to arrive in Akká, establishing a valuable presence inside the city. No one suspected him of being a Baha'i, and with the help of Persian representatives, he opened a shop. Abdul Ahad had kept his distance from the exiles when they arrived, but he rendered a great service to the Persian Baha'i community by communicating Baha'u'llah's true whereabouts, thereby dissipating the rumors widely circulated by the Azalis, the covenant breakers, that Baha'u'lláh had drowned. The only other Baha'i living in the city of Akká at that time was Muhammad Jafar-i Tabrizi, titled Mansour. But there were early pilgrims to Akká. On the left is Haji Amin, hand of the cause, and on the right is Mirza Abdur Rahim. The few pilgrims who managed to reach Akká had to content themselves with fleeting glimpses of Baha'u'llah's hand or handkerchief as they stood on the moat facing his cell. And those who entered Akká could not approach the barracks, the saddest story possibly being the one of Ustad Ismaili Kashi, a master builder of considerable experience, and Agha Husseini Ashchi's uncle, the one who was the maker of broths during the long march between Baghdad and Istanbul. Ustad Ismaili Kashi had walked from Mosul, Iraq, and he had been exiled, and he walked to Akká despite his advanced age. His eyesight was so poor that he could not see Baha'u'llah's hand waving to him from across the moat, an episode that greatly saddened the entire Holy Family. The first 2 pilgrims who were able to enter the presence of Baha'u'lláh in the Holy Land were Haji Abdul Hassan-i Ardekhani, surnamed Amini Ilahi, trustee of God, better known as Haji Amin, and Haji Shah Muhammad Iman Shadi, entitled Aminul Bayan, trustee of the Bayan by Baha'u'lláh. They saw Baha'u'lláh from a distance in a public bath, but neither were able to approach or talk to him. Mullah Muhammad Ali, titled Nabili Kaini, was recognized and expelled from the city. This is Nabil, the historian. But he made several attempts and managed to enter the Most Great Prison and enter Baha'u'llah's presence, which was so overpowering with majesty and power that he fainted and fell. Agha Abdur Rahim, titled Rahim, the Compassionate by Baha'u'lláh, traveled 6 months on foot to reach Akká, arriving at the same time as Nabil Azam. Abdur Rahim began circumambulating the most great prison and saw Baha'u'llah's hand beckoning him to enter the barracks. Rahim entered through the gates unnoticed by the guards, and soon he was in the presence of Baha'u'lláh, who told him he had temporarily blinded the soldiers' eyes so that Rahim might attain his presence. Rahim stayed in the barracks for a few days and left with several tablets Baha'u'lláh had revealed for him and for the Persian Bahais. 3 tablets from Baha'u'lláh to Agha Abdur Rahim have recently been provisionally translated into English by Adib Masumian, and you can find the references in the link to the chronology, which I will send you after class. If you do not get my emails, please write your email at the bottom so I can include you in the mailing list. And so in these provisionally translated tablets, they provide us with a little bit more context about the significance of this event in Baha'u'llah's own words, as he takes the time to twice refer to Rahim's miraculous entry into the most great prison, described in these words: "Thou didst pass through the gate from which whosoever yearned for it was cruelly kept back, as a result of what the evil one whispered in the breasts of the heedless. Lo, we extinguished the brightness of the eyes of them that were resolved to obstruction, and we enabled thee to enter with a power derived from us." The other mention Baha'u'lláh makes of this miraculous event is, "Call thou to mind the time when thou didst enter the city, as the prison gate was guarded by the hosts of iniquity, how we extinguished the brightness of their eyes and enabled thee to arrive at the seat of the throne with power and majesty, eventually appearing before our countenance." There were also Bahais in Haifa and Nazareth, and this is a vintage postcard depicting a panorama of Nazareth. Mirza Ibrahim-i Kashani, titled Khalil, was also known as Khalil Mansour, was mentioned in the untranslated tablet of the 9th day of Rizvan. He was a coppersmith and had been exiled to Mosul before arriving in Haifa, where he became an important channel of communication between the believers and Baha'u'lláh, sending and receiving letters and looking after the pilgrims arriving in the Holy Land. Ustad Ismail, the elderly master builder who had not seen Baha'u'llah's waving hand, lived in a cave on Mount Carmel and earned his living as a peddler, carrying a small tray with needles, thimbles, and other small articles for sale. Agha Muhammad Ali Kaini also worked as a peddler and lived in Nazareth. That's Nabil Azam, who is also mentioned in the same Rizvan tablet. So Nabil had been released from his Alexandrian prison and had arrived in Akká disguised as an Uzbek. But the 2 Azalis, Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani and Kaj Kula, had reported him to the Ottoman authorities, and he was expelled from Akká. Nabil managed to enter Akká at the end of October 1868 and stayed 3 days before being expelled again. He retreated to the caves of Mount Carmel and roamed the countryside between the Sea of Galilee, Hebron, and Nazareth for 4 months. In February 1869, he was able to enter for a 3rd time and remain in Akká longer than he had in his previous attempt, but he did not enter the presence of Baha'u'lláh until his 4th attempt on May 1st, 1869. Between the 21st of March and the 9th of June, 1870, Nabil spent 81 days with Baha'u'lláh in the most great prison. With the presence of Baha'u'lláh and the Bahais in Akká, residents of Akká started becoming Bahais, and this is such an important part of our history. Wanted to give you very short biographies of 8 such early believers, and this is a photograph of the only one that we have a photograph for, which is Colonel Ahmad Ijara. and I will tell you his story. He was the commander of the guard during Baha'u'llah's imprisonment. Khalil Ahmad Abdu was a revered and respected old man who, after seeing Baha'u'llah arrive in Akká, remember when Baha'u'llah first arrived in Akká, when we told the story yesterday, I mentioned there were two people who were really impressed with him, and he was one of those. So Khalil Ahmad Abdu told people he could see in Baha'u'llah's face the signs of greatness and majesty. And he spoke of how Baha'u'llah would bring blessings and prosperity to the people of Akká, and that they should be thankful and they should rejoice for his presence among them, and that he had blessed their homelands with his footsteps. Abdullah Tuzi was also the other person who was attracted to Baha'u'llah's radiance and power from the moment he saw him disembark. He became a Baha'i, and his daughter, born on the day Baha'u'llah arrived in Akká, 31 August 1868, later married one of our favorite characters in this story, Agha Hussein-i-Ashchi, the maker of soups. Ahmad Ijara, the handsome man whose photograph you see now, was an officer in the Ottoman army, and he was a commander of the guard in the barracks. He was a first-hand witness to Baha'u'llah's powerful presence and later became a Baha'i, along with his brother Amin Effendi, the head of the municipality of Akká. Their faith was confirmed when they sought the presence of Baha'u'llah to complain about a superior officer. But before they could even give his name, Baha'u'llah said, "Praise be to God who has rescued you from the evil doings of Aghazi." Their older brother Khalid, a physician, also became a Baha'i and showed love and care to the believers when they were ill. Sheikh Ali Emiri was a fanatical Muslim and the Mufti of Akká. He asked Abdul Baha to meet Baha'u'llah, but he was offended when Abdul Baha prevented him from interrupting Baha'u'llah. With time, his arrogance gave way to sincere humility, and he later testified that when he prayed, the figure of Baha'u'llah always appeared before him. Uthman Effendi owned a grocery store in Akká and supplied Baha'u'llah's daily provisions, paid on a monthly basis. He became attracted by the integrity of the believers, and he became a Baha'i and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, who promised him he would become a wealthy and influential figure. Baha'u'llah's prophecy came to pass, and Uthman Effendi acquired half the Druze village of Kasra. Finally, our last portrait of Akká people becoming Baha'i is Cesar Castafago, who was the son of Luis Castafago, who was a widower and a longtime French consular agent for Haifa and Akká. He was one of the most influential Christian Arabs in the region. When Louis Castafago, Caesar's father, translated Baha'u'llah's second tablet to Napoleon III into French and sent it to the emperor, his son Caesar was so affected by the tone and the content of the tablet that he became a Baha'i soon after. Caesar was briefly confused by the Azalis, but soon returned to being a faithful follower of Baha'u'llah. This is a very beautiful aerial photograph in modern times of the city of Akká. The bright white building you see here is the house of Aboud, and behind it, without a red roof, is the house of Udi Khamar, which we're going to speak about in the next part. This is the story of the extraordinary conversion of a man named Sheikh Mahmoud. Sheikh Mahmoud Arabi was a native of Akká and one of the city's religious leaders from a very devout family. When he was 10 years old, his family witnessed an upsetting event during Ramadan when the sun appeared to have risen again, and a revered sheikh told them the Mehdi had been murdered in Persia. The Shah prophesied a prisoner would one day come to Akká and told the young boy, Sheikh Mahmoud, to remain vigilant, saying, "Unto this city of Akká will one day come the great one. He will abide in a high house with many, many steps." Sheikh Mahmoud grew up and forgot about the old sheikh's prophecy. When the god of the Persians arrived in Akká, he confronted Abdul Baha in the mosque, grabbing him by the hand and asking, "Are you the Son of God? Abdul Baha reminded Sheikh Mahmoud of charity towards guests in Islam, and his loving demeanor affected him, but he still decided he was going to kill Baha'u'lláh, and he hid a weapon in his cloak. He was an influential religious figure in Akká and was immediately granted access to Baha'u'lláh. But Baha'u'lláh relayed him a message through the guards saying, "Tell him to cast away the weapon, and then he may come in." Sheikh Mahmoud was astounded. He returned to the barracks, determined to kill Baha'u'lláh with his own hands. But the guards relayed another message for him when he arrived. "Tell him to purify his heart first, and then he may come in." Baffled, the Sheikh went home and dreamt of the old Sheikh's prophecy from his childhood so many years ago about a Persian-speaking prisoner residing in a room at the top of a long flight of stairs. On his third visit, Sheikh Mahmoud was ushered into Baha'u'llah's presence. Upon gazing on his countenance, he fell to his knees and became an ardent Babi until the end of his life, even compiling a book of Islamic traditions related to Akká. Sheikh Mahmoud played a pivotal role in helping Baha'i pilgrims enter Akká, sneaking them in under cover of darkness disguised as servants and harboring them in his home. He also plays a large role after the ascension of Baha'u'lláh as the man who will guide Baha'u'llah's tomb for 7 days until the wall was repaired. Now we come to a very difficult part of the chronology. Between the 23rd of June to the 4th of November, 1870, is the martyrdom of Mirza Mehdi and its aftermath. Between 1849 and 1870, the life of Mirza Mehdi. This is a portrait of Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch, the son of Baha'u'lláh, dating back to Adrianople 2 years prior to his death in 1870. Mirza Mehdi was the essence of gentleness and purity. He was born in 1849 in Tehran in the turmoil of the momentous year that saw the martyrdom of countless Babis in the uprisings of Mazandaran, Nayriz, and Zanjan, and the martyrdom of the Bab. When Baha'u'lláh was exiled to Baghdad with his family, the 3-year-old Mirza Mehdi was too young and too fragile to survive the arduous winter journey, and he was separated from his family for 7 years, finally reunited with them in 1856, after Baha'u'lláh had returned from Sulaymaniyeh. As a youth, Mirza Mehdi was so pure that he became magnetized by the forces of Baha'u'llah's revelation and served his father every moment of his young life, acting as his amanuensis, copying innumerable tablets in his distinguished and rapid handwriting, of which we still have many samples. Mirza Mehdi was a noble, pious, and spiritual young man, whom Baha'u'llah titled Ghusnullahul Athar, the purest branch. He led a pure and spiritual life and was a pillar of strength in the Baha'i community, often sitting with the believers and reading with them from the writings of Baha'u'llah, and in the words of Shohi Effendi, teaching them the lessons of courtesy and patience, of dignity and radiant submission to the will of God. In 1870, Mirza Mehdi was 21 years old and closely resembled Abdul Baha, although slightly taller than him and without a beard, displaying divine spiritual qualities and an exquisite character. In the most great prison, Mirza Mehdi lived close to Baha'u'llah, entering his presence in the afternoon to serve as his amanuensis and devoting a great deal of time to prayer and meditation. On the 22nd of June, 1870, Mirza Mehdi falls through the skylight. This is two merged photographs showing the dual view Mirza Mehdi would have had from the top of the barracks. To the west, Mirza Mehdi would have seen the Mediterranean off the coast of Akká. And to the northeast, Mirza Mehdi would have seen a view of Mount Hermon, about 90 kilometers away from Akká. Mirza Mehdi, along with many of the prisoners, had the habit of climbing the narrow stairs to the rooftop of the barracks. The roof was an ideal vantage point. where the prisoners could enjoy spectacular views of the Mount Hermon to the northeast and the pure azure blue of the Mediterranean to the west, as well as a refreshing sea breeze at the end of a sweltering summer day. There, the purest branch would spend long hours in prayer and meditation, communing with God while pacing back and forth. This rooftop had a fatal flaw. It was a rectangular, unprotected skylight in the middle of the roof near the kitchens, which Mirza Mehdi was aware of, and he kept track of this skylight by counting his steps when he was busy pacing and praying. In the late afternoon of 22nd of June, 1870, Baha'u'lláh informed Mirza Mehdi that he would not need that day to copy tablets. So the purest branch climbed to the rooftop around twilight and began chanting the matchless verses of Baha'u'lláh from the Qatsiye-i Varkaye, the Ode of the Dove, that heavenly poem that he had revealed in Kurdistan. Mirza Mehdi was transported into such a state of spiritual ecstasy that he did not keep track of the skylight and fell through, impaling himself on an open wooden crate on the floor 10 meters, 34 feet below. June 23rd, 1870, the sacrifice of the purest branch. The top two photographs are two views of the narrow stairs leading to the rooftop of the Most Great Prison. And on the bottom right, the original exposed stone that covered the ground when Mirza Mehdi fell. And of course, on the left, on the bottom, is the skylight itself. Mirza Mehdi's body crashed with a deafening sound on the crates below the skylight, alerting all the Bahais. Baha'u'lláh came out of his room and the believers ran towards the sound. Baha'u'lláh reached his injured son and asked what had happened, and Mirza Mehdi told his father he had forgotten to count his steps on the roof. The crate had pierced Mirza Mehdi's ribs and he was bleeding profusely. His companions tore the clothes off his battered body and carried him to his room, and Baha'u'lláh called for an Italian physician who was unable to treat the purest branch. Slowly dying from his wounds, weak, and in a tremendous amount of pain, Mirza Mehdi lay on his bed perfectly attentive to all his visitors, fellow exiles who came to sit and stand by his side, attending to his every need. He greeted them all warmly, apologizing about being forced to lie down in his presence, and he was kind, caring, and polite to all. Agha Husseini Ashchi describes Mirza Mehdi's last hours. It is not possible for anyone to visualize the measure of humility and self-effacement and the intensity of devotion and meekness which the purest branch evinced in his life. Asiye Khanum, Bahiye Khanum, and Abdul Baha were utterly distraught. And Abdul Baha entered the presence of Baha'u'lláh with tear-filled eyes, begging him to heal his brother. Baha'u'lláh replied to him, "Oh, my greatest branch, leave him in the hands of his God." Baha'u'lláh entered Mirza Mehdi's room and after dismissing everyone, remained alone with his dying son for an hour. Before Mirza Mehdi died, Baha'u'lláh asked him, "Agha, what do you wish? Tell me." Instead of asking his father to spare his life, Mirza Mehdi replied, "I wish the people of Baha to be able to attain your presence." And Baha'u'lláh granted him his wish with the words, "And so it shall be. God will grant your wish." In a prayer revealed in honor of Mirza Mehdi, Baha'u'lláh heartbreakingly proclaims, Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. Thou seest me in the hands of my enemies, and my son bloodstained before thy face. O thou in whose hands is the kingdom of all names. Mirza Mehdi passed away 24 hours after his fall on the 23rd of June, 1870. When he had breathed his last breath, Baha'u'lláh was heard lamenting, Mehdi, O Mehdi. On the 24th of June, 1870, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the funeral of Mirza Mehdi. You are among the only people in the world who know the exact time of Mirza Mehdi's funeral. And the reason is because we know that an earthquake took place as they interred the body of Mirza Mehdi. But what maybe not many people have done is go into the Israeli records, archival records for earthquakes in Israel for the last 300 years, and looked for an earthquake that day. And there was an earthquake that day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So we know that's when he was buried. On the left is a 1930s photograph depicting the section of the Muslim cemetery of Akká, where the shrine of Nabi Salih is located, with a row of graves indicating that of Mirza Mehdi. And on the right, the original headstone of Mirza Mehdi's grave in the cemetery of Nabi Salih, before his remains were moved to their final resting place in the company of his saintly mother, Asiya Khanum, and sister Bahia Khanum, on the slopes of Mount Carmel and at the heart of the administrative order of the Baha'i faith. Sheikh Mahmoud, whose conversion we looked at in detail, was one of the first devoted Baha'is of Akká. And he asked, nay, begged Baha'u'lláh for the honor of being allowed to wash and shroud the sacred body of Mirza Mehdi, so the barracks guards would not lay a hand on his body. A tent was pitched in the courtyard of the most great prison, where the body of Mirza Mehdi was brought. In the presence of Baha'u'lláh, Sheikh Mahmoud, assisted with water and supplies by a few believers, including Agha Husseini Ashchi, prepared the body of Mirza Mehdi for burial. While Baha'u'lláh and Sheikh Mahmoud were in the tent, Abdul Baha, utterly grief-stricken by the loss of his beloved younger brother, was rapidly pacing outside and keeping watch, his sorrow deeply imprinted on his face. Other believers circumambulated the tent where the body of the purest branch was being washed. Baha'u'lláh speaks of this exact moment that I just described in a tablet to the Bahais of Ghazvin, revealed on the day of the death of Mirza Mehdi, 23rd of June, 1870. At this very moment, my son is being washed before my face, after our having sacrificed him in the most great prison. Thereat have the dwellers of the Abha tabernacle wept with a great weeping, and such as have suffered imprisonment with this youth in the path of God, the Lord of the promised day lamented. Under such conditions, my pen hath not been prevented from remembering its Lord, the Lord of all nations. It summoneth the people unto God, the Almighty, the All-Bountiful. This is the day whereon that was created by the light of Baha has suffered martyrdom at a time when he lay imprisoned at the hands of his enemies. On the 24th of June in the afternoon, Mirza Mehdi's martyred body was placed in a casket, and as the sounds of weeping and lamentation rose, it was carried out of the most great prison on the shoulder of barrack guards in a serene and majestic funeral procession, joined by the notables of Akká. Baha'u'llah's youngest son was laid to rest in a Muslim cemetery beyond city walls, near the shrine of Nabi Salih. After Mirza Mehdi's funeral at 5 p.m. on the 24th of June, 1870, an earthquake hit Palestine. The tremors lasted 3 minutes and were felt around Palestine, from Jerusalem to Akká, Nazareth, Gaza. Nabil Sayyid Mehdi Haji and Nabil Kaini were in Nazareth when the earth shook and said many people were frightened. Baha'u'lláh himself confirmed the earthquake following Mirza Mehdi's burial in a tablet of visitation for the purest branch. When thou wast laid to rest in the earth itself trembled in its longing to meet thee. Between the 23rd of June, 1870 and the 4th of November, 1870 is the period after the death of Mirza Mehdi. These are pilgrims in a moment of prayer at the site of Mirza Mehdi's martyrdom, the very site where he beseeched Baha'u'lláh to accept his life as a sacrifice so that pilgrims may attend unto his presence. After the tragic death of her youngest son, Asiye Khanum was inconsolable. She wept almost incessantly until Baha'u'lláh kindly assured her that God had accepted her beloved Mirza Mehdi's martyrdom and that pilgrims would soon be able to attain his presence, that mankind might be quickened. It was the only thing that could have consoled Asiye Khanum, and her weeping ceased. Bahiye Khanum, heartbroken though she was at Mirza Mehdi's death, carefully gathered the bloodstained clothes of her martyred brother, which she later left to the International Baha'i Archives. Soon after Mirza Mehdi's death, many restrictions in the barracks were relaxed, and several Baha'i pilgrims entered the presence of Baha'u'lláh. These are column details from the twin tombs of the purest branch, Mirza Mehdi, the son of Baha'u'lláh, and Asiye Khanum, the wife of Baha'u'lláh. Columns are a powerful symbol for the monument gardens where the Holy Family is buried, because just as columns in the physical world support edifices, the holy souls of Baha'u'llah's faithful, long-serving, long-suffering, radiant immediate family spiritually support the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh revealed a highly significant prayer in memory of Mirza Mehdi, exalting his death to the rank of the great acts of atonements associated with Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein. I have, O my Lord, offered up that which thou hast given me, that thy servants may be quickened, and all that dwell on earth be united. Baha'u'lláh described Mirza Mehdi as created of the light of Baha, whose meekness the supreme pen had testified, and of the mysteries of whose martyrdom that same pen had made mention, calling his son the trust of God and his treasure in the Holy Land, offered up by his father as a ransom for the regeneration of the world and the unification of its peoples. Addressing prophetic words to his deceased son, Baha'u'lláh affirms, ere long will God reveal through thee that which he hath desired. Shoei Effendi stated that in the Babi dispensation, the Bab sacrificed his own life for the redemption and purification of mankind, whereas in the Baha'i dispensation, it was Mirza Mehdi who gave his life in order to release the spiritual forces necessary for the unification of mankind, the primary object of the faith and of his father, Baha'u'lláh. On the 5th of December, 1939, Shoei Effendi made a momentous announcement to the American Baha'is about the transfer of the blessed remains of Mirza Mehdi and Asiye Khanum to their final resting places on Mount Carmel, the spiritually potent heart of the future administrative order of the faith, where the energies released by Mirza Mehdi's martyrdom would continue to inspire those working tirelessly to transform the primary objectives of Baha'u'llah's revelation into tangible reality. on the 4th of November, 1870, God will grant your wish. The prison gates open. This is a beautiful 1971 color photograph of old Akká, 101 years after Baha'u'lláh left the most great prison in November 1870, after an incarceration of 2 years and 2 months. After its catastrophic performance in the Crimean War of 1854-1856, the Ottoman army was reorganized. New army regulations, the regulation of general military forces, were issued in August 1869 under Hussein Avni Pasha, the Serasker, Minister of National Defense and Army Recruitment, was reformed in March 1870. After these reforms of the Ottoman army, Akká became the site of new military activities, and the barracks were filled with soldiers, which were housed in the city. Baha'u'lláh protested at the crowding and problems produced by such an influx of troops, and in early November 1870, the governor allowed Baha'u'lláh, his family, and the exiled Bahais to leave the barracks in order to live in the city under house arrest and surveillance. Mirza Mehdi's silent prayer on his deathbed and Baha'u'llah's promise to him were about to be fulfilled. Baha'i pilgrims would soon attain Baha'u'llah's presence freely. Baha'u'llah's life in Akká had begun. And now we move on to part 8, which spans 7 years and 7 houses in Akká, probably, I think about 7. The Blessed Beauty, part 8, 1870, 1877, Akká. This part covers the life of Baha'u'lláh between the age of 53 in 1870 to the age of 60 in 1877. Between the 4th of November to 1870 until September 1871, Baha'u'llah's first 4 houses in Akká. Between the 4th of November 1870 until about February 1871, this is an estimate, the House of Malik. This is a 1682 engraving of St. Andrew's Church in Akká in the vicinity of both the houses of Malik and the house of Chavan. 4 months after the martyrdom of Mirza Mehdi, the barracks had been requisitioned to house an influx of Ottoman soldiers, and Baha'u'lláh and his family were moved to the house of Malik in the Fakhura quarter. Fakhura was the former German Templar quarter near the churches of St. George and St. Andrew in the Christian southwestern part of Akká. It was a small step towards freedom. The exiles' strict confinement had been relaxed, but the guards still watched over them for the first year, during which the Holy Family would be moved from house to house wherever space was available. November 1870, the Hani Avamid. So we know where Baha'u'lláh was moved. He was moved to the house of Malik, but where were the other Baha'is moved? They were moved to the Hani Avamid. This is a modern photograph of the caravanserai we know as Hani Avamid, the Inn of the Pillars, purposefully not showing the distinctive clock tower that it has, which did not exist at the time of Baha'u'lláh. In November 1870, the majority of the Baha'i exiles in the most great prison were relocated to a caravanserai in the heart of the city called the Hani Avamid, the Khan of the Pillars, the Inn of the Pillars. It was built at the harbor edge, north of the sea gate, in the south eastern quarter of Akka. Jazar Pasha had built the Hani Avamid in 1875, and the caravanserai was also known as the Inn of the Pillars for its impressive colonnade of granite pillars taken from Roman ruins at Caesarea, surrounding its courtyard. The Bahais occupied the southern wings and eastern wings of the upper floor of the caravanserai, but the damp and filthy rooms were unfit for living. When they first arrived, food was so hard to come by that a loaf of bread normally meant for a single person's meal had to be cut in 4 to last an entire day. All other food was carefully allocated and beans were counted when they were served to make sure everyone would get food. Mirza Musa and his family lived in the Hani Avamid for a time in a small house set inside the courtyard before moving to the house of Malik after it was vacated by Baha'u'llah's family. Abdul Baha lived in the caravanserai and helped the exiles settle in, refurbishing the most degraded rooms with the proceeds from a sale of a valuable gift he had received in Baghdad. Abdul Baha welcomed, housed, and prepared arriving pilgrims, both spiritually and practically, to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah, for example, finding them clothes if their clothes were too dirty, torn, or stained. His own room in the Hani Avamid was a nightmare, grass growing on the walls and so infested with fleas that he developed a system of flipping his sheepskin blanket inside out 8 to 10 times a night to avoid getting his entire body stung by the fleas. For a time, his room was also where he entertained visitors. Several years later, when the conditions in the Hani Avamid had improved, Abdul Baha instituted Baha'i children's classes every morning and afternoon, which his children also attended. When Baha'u'llah was living in Bahji, he would sometimes visit the Hani Avamid on his visits to Akká. As the Baha'is moved out of the caravanserai and into the city of Akká proper, the Hani Avamid became the very first pilgrim house in Baha'i history and would welcome some of Baha'u'llah's most outstanding disciples, such as apostles of Baha'u'llah, Zainul Mugharrabin, Mishkin Kalam, Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, and the celebrated teacher of the faith and spiritual giant, whom Abdul Baha called the Angel of Carmel. And now it's time for Baha'u'llah's family to move. Sometime between February and May of 1871, Baha'u'llah moves to the house of Mansourhavan. This homage to the Christian neighborhood of Akká is a photograph of a Franciscan father in Akká, because he was in the Christian area at this point. So in February 1871, after 3 months in the house of Malik, the Ottoman authorities relocate Baha'u'llah and the Holy Family across the narrow lane to the house of Khavam, still in the Christian neighborhood, where they would live for about 3 months. And we interrupt this broadcast to present to you between April and the 5th of October, 1871, the very first Western article about Baha'u'llah. And this image you're looking at the top is the English Mission Hospital in Jerusalem in 1897. This is the same hospital, British hospital for Jews in Jerusalem, which Dr. Thomas Chaplin headed for 25 years. And Dr. Thomas Chaplin is the author of this first article on Baha'u'llah and the Bahais. He calls him the Babs of Persia. And it's a very long article. Let me show you how long it is. This is the beginning. And it keeps going. And it keeps going. And it ends. It's a very long article. I believe, if I'm not, there are several articles that you can look up, I think, but you can actually read this very clearly on the website, which you're going to get in tonight's email. For 25 years, a British doctor named Dr. Thomas Chaplin was the director of the British hospital for Jews in Jerusalem, while simultaneously advancing scientific research in a variety of fields. He was so well regarded that the Jewish people of Jerusalem simply called him the Great English Doctor. In April 1871, Dr. Chaplin decided to visit Baha'u'lláh in Akká, but instead he met with Abdu'l-Baha for 2 hours instead. The result of Dr. Chaplin's meeting with Abdu'l-Baha was, according to Dr. Mujan Momen, the first extended commentary on Baha'u'lláh and the Baha'i doctrine in Western newspapers, though Dr. Chaplin calls the Baha'i faith the Babs. I just think that's very cute. The article published on page 8 of the Times of London on October 5th, 1871 was titled "The Babs of Persia." I love the Babs. This article is also valuable for what is perhaps the very first Western pen portrait of Abdu'l-Baha at the age of 27, 2 years before his marriage, seen through the eyes of a 19th century Londoner. A long section follows describing Thomas Chaplin's interview with Abdu'l-Baha, which is covered in the illustrated chronology of the life of Abdu'l-Baha, which we will look at together. Thank you very much. Next month. So I'm going to keep the surprise for that. Dr. Chaplin states several significant misconceptions about the faith, describes 20,000 martyred Babis in Persia and all of Baha'u'llah's exiles and his current house arrest in Akká. Those are correct. Dr. Chaplin's conclusion is that, quote, "This remarkable movement and its history are suggestive of many reflections. In its religious, social, and political aspects, it is full of interest, and it seems surprising that public attention has not been earlier drawn to it. From all that I could learn, these people lead pure and harmless lives and hold no political opinion which could render them dangerous." I mean, if there's anything he should have gotten right, he did. That's very important. And it's time for another move. Between May and September 1871, Baha'u'lláh is moved to the house of Rabi. David Rue, in Door of Hope, member of the Universal House of Justice and eminent Baha'i historian, in his wonderful book, Door of Hope, says that the house of Rabi was adjacent to the shrine of Sheikh Ghanim, which is a location immediately behind the seawalls of Akká. The illustration for the location of this house, which is unknown, is an 1836 engraving of the seawalls of Akká, behind which lie the Muslim neighborhood in which the house of Rabi was located. After 6 months in the Christian neighborhood of Akká and three different houses, the Ottoman authorities moved Baha'u'lláh in his family to the Muslim quarter, which had once been the quarter of the merchants of Pisa during the Crusades between the 11th and the 13th centuries. The Holy Family moved in with Rabi'eh, a charcoal maker, and his family for the next 4 months. The house of Rabi'eh was adjacent to the tiny shrine of Sheikh Ghanim ben Ali ben Hussein al-Ansari al-Khazraji, one of Saladin's army commanders. That name. And finally, after how many months? May, August, September, May, June, July, August. After 4 months in the house of Rabi, Baha'u'lláh moves again. But this time he's going to stay in this house for 2 years. Welcome to the house of Udi Hamar. This image is the facade. Oh, do I have the bottom of this? No, I'm sorry. That's not the ideal picture. The image of the facade of the house of Udi Hamar, and it's a modern photograph. I digitally altered it to remove all the cars and the parking signs and the telegraph lines and the phone lines. I 19th century it with Photoshop. Sorry, Wikipedia. After 4 months in the house of Rabi, the Bahais found a much more promising accommodation in the house vacated by Udi Hamar, a wealthy Maronite Christian. He was an important figure in Akká, and he and his family were patrons of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George, located close to Baha'u'llah's first two houses in the Christian quarter in the city. Udi Khamar was a wealthy merchant who had gone into business with his nephew, Ilyas Aboud, who lived in the Eastern Mediterranean-facing part of this large house, separated by a wall, the house we Baha'is now know as the House of Aboud, after Ilyas Aboud. In September 1871, Udi Khamar moved into this recently completed mansion named Bahji, Delight, about 2 kilometers, 1.5 miles north of Akká in the countryside, and rented his small Akká townhouse on Aboud, now Genoa Square, in what used to be the Italian Genoese quarter of Akká. Ilyas Aboud was not happy to share the wall of his home with the Persian exiles, and he tried to prevent the transaction. He failed, but he took steps to avoid all contact with the Baha'i exiles, whom he considered undesirable neighbors. Baha'u'lláh took a room overlooking an open space at the back of the house. Though it was an improvement on the previous 3 houses, it was still woefully inadequate for Baha'u'llah's large family. The accommodations were so cramped that 13 people, men and women, were forced to sleep in one room. And one night, a person rolled off the shelf where they were sleeping and fell on top of the others. Indeed, very cramped. Oh, you think we had forgotten about the Azalis? No, 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 they are back. 1868 to January 1872, the activities of the Azalis in Akká. Autumn 1868, when they arrive in the barracks, they volunteer as spies for the Ottomans. When the Baha'i exiles first arrived in the most great prison, the 2 Azalis, partisans of Mirza Yahya, Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani, the antichrist of the Baha'i revelation, and his minion Kajkula, had requested a room above one of the city gates from which they could spy, reporting Baha'is trying to enter Akká to the Ottoman authorities. Sayyid Mahmoud adopted the name of Qudus Effendi, meaning Holy One, and Kajkula went by the name Mirza Yahya had given him, Sayful Haq, the sword of truth. They enrolled a local man to their cause who engineered the expulsion of Agha Abdur Rasuli Zanjani and his companions. Now the story of Naim Effendi. This is a stylized map on the journey of Naim Effendi from and eventually back to Famagusta, Cyprus, which is described in this short section. After the expulsion of Agha Abdur Rasul, a recently declared Baha'i by the name of Naim Effendi arrived, who had been taught the faith by our beloved Mishkin Kalam in Cyprus, where he was originally from. Naim Effendi arrived in Akká, entered the presence of Baha'u'lláh, and Abdul Baha entrusted him with several letters to take back with him to Cyprus. Remember, 4 loyal and loyal Baha'is, loyal to Baha'u'lláh, had been exiled with Mirza Yahya, and 2 of Mirza Yahya's loyal covenant breakers had been exiled with Baha'u'lláh. So this was Baha'u'lláh writing tablets to the faithful Baha'is in Cyprus, admittedly probably who were suffering greatly because they were in the midst of Mirza Yahya. So Abdul Baha entrusted Naim Effendi with several letters to take back to Cyprus. The Azalis and the Persian consular agent found out, detained Naim Effendi, and confiscated the letters as he was leaving for Haifa. The Persian consular agent had been blinded by the Azalis, and Abdul Baha could not dissuade him. Naim Effendi was sent to Beirut, where he was imprisoned for 6 months. After he was released, he was sent back to Cyprus, where Naim Effendi prospered greatly. The covenant breakers have a new recruit. Mirza Reza Kuli Tafrishi was the brother of Badri Jan, Mirza Yahya's estranged wife. While he was in Akká, Mirza Reza Kuli Tafrishi lived a life contrary to Baha'i teachings and committed shameful deeds in the company of some Christians, bringing public disgrace on the name of the faith. Baha'u'lláh was forced to expel him from the Baha'i community, and he immediately rejoined the ranks of Sayyid Muhammad and Kashkullah, swelling their ranks to 3 bitter and jealous individuals intent on destroying Baha'u'llah's name by all means. Emboldened by their new recruit and the increased freedom of living in Akká, the 3 Azalis were infused with a sordid energy and redoubled their efforts. They embarked on a calculated campaign of abuse, calumny, and intrigue, aiming to agitate the already suspicious inhabitants of Akká to higher levels of hostility. And just a small interlude here to talk about covenant breaking, which is really, in essence, jealousy and backbiting. And you know that famous image of backbiting as the reason backbiting is so evil is because you can't control where it goes and who it touches. So it's almost like that old story of going up to the top of a church and shaking out a pillow made out of feathers. And then to reverse backbiting, you have to go down and pick up every single feather from that pillow. That's backbiting. You can't, so just don't do it. The Azalis initially succeeded in poisoning the minds of the Ottoman authorities and Akká notables and officials, but their increased contact with Baha'u'lláh won them over to Baha'u'lláh, and the Azalis were furious, and they became nearly unstoppable in their jealousy-fueled efforts to discredit Baha'u'lláh, backbite him, destroy his reputation, misrepresent him, and destroy the reputation of the faith. 3 people can do a lot of damage. It is estimated sometime after 1872, the passing of Khadija Khanum, the mother of Baha'u'lláh. And in honor of her, a photograph of the inside of the house of her husband, Mirza Buzurg, where Baha'u'lláh was born, and where she raised her exceptional saintly son. Baha'u'llah's mother passed away in Tehran sometime after 1872, based on indications found in a tablet revealed by Baha'u'lláh. Khadija Khanum had born, raised, and loved, and given to the world the manifestation of God, whose advent all past religions, including the Babs, had promised. In the tablet of visitation he revealed for his mother, Baha'u'lláh calls her the most honored, esteemed, and respected mother, and testifies that this my mother, who hath acknowledged thy oneness, confessed thy unity, attained the honor of meeting thy manifestations in thy days, reached the station of recognition, and entered the tabernacle of heaven. For she loved thyself and thy servant, and she held fast the cord of thy love through the sanctified temples of thy sovereignty. Baha'u'lláh beseeches God to rain down upon his mother spiritual bounties of nearness and mercy and forgiveness and union and everlasting life. Before signing the tablet, Abdullah Hussein Ali, a signature not found in any other tablet, perhaps because this is the tablet that would be read by relatives unfriendly towards Baha'u'lláh and the faith. And this atmosphere is the atmosphere in which Baha'u'lláh revealed our well-beloved and well-known fire tablet, Kad Ihtahral Mukhlisun, around the end of 1871. And these are some words of the fire tablet that are the ones where Baha'u'lláh exclaims, the infidels have arisen in tyranny on every side. The barking of dogs is loud on every side. Calamity hath reached its height. The necks of men are stretched out in malice. Supported in suffering. Towards the end of 1871, Baha'u'lláh received a letter from one of his devoted followers in Persia, Haji Sayyid Ali Akbar Idahaji, and he revealed the Lahi Kad Ihtakal Mukhlisun, the fire tablet, in response. It is one of Baha'u'llah's most celebrated tablets, endowed with great spiritual power and deriving its name from its most well-known verse. Should all the servants read and ponder this, there shall be kindled in their veins a fire that shall set aflame the worlds. The fire tablet describes the activities of the Azalis' efforts to destroy Baha'u'llah's reputation through slander and misrepresentation, and speaks clearly to Baha'u'llah's seclusion, isolation, and solitude in this period of turmoil, exiled in a far-off land with no one but his immediate nuclear family around him. When Baha'u'lláh first revealed the fire tablet, it raised awareness of the immensity of his sufferings among the believers in Akká, perhaps resonating so profoundly with the believers then and now because of the fact that part of the tablet dealing with the tyranny of the Azalis and Baha'u'llah's suffering is revealed in the voice of man, giving the impression that it is the human Baha'u'lláh who is speaking to God, a mode of revelation which allows to bond deeply with the sufferings of the manifestation of God. And now I'm going to introduce you to Nasir, the man of action. The Azalis had long stepped over the line of decency, and the Bahais devoted to Baha'u'lláh were increasingly unable to tolerate the repeated insults on behalf of their beloved. They began thinking about how to put an end to the Azali problem once and for all. Haji Abbas, known as Nasir, was a Baha'i from Beirut, Lebanon, who arrived in Akká determined to silence the Azalis. When Baha'u'lláh was appraised of his intentions, he immediately sent Nasir back to Beirut before he could add fuel to the flames of an already tense situation. Speaking these words to him in a tablet, "Go hence and do not perpetrate that wherefrom mischief will result." If that was not clear enough, Baha'u'lláh categorically forbade all retribution. This is the word no in Arabic. No, 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 no. After Nasir left, Akká Bahais went to Baha'u'lláh and begged for permission to deal with the Azalis. One believer, Agha Muhammad Ibrahim Kashani, pleaded with Baha'u'lláh to allow him to please, if I could, just assassinate Sayyid Muhammad and his two associates. Baha'u'lláh emphatically forbade any retribution against the three men. Baha'u'lláh emphatically forbade any retribution against the three men. They didn't hear it, but you hear it. They didn't hear this, and advised the believers to shun the thought of revenge or violence. And for the third time in his life, Baha'u'lláh went into seclusion. This is a view of the house of Udi Khamar from Genoa Square. This is the rear of the building we now know as the House of Aboud. The Azalis' efforts to misrepresent Baha'u'lláh and the faith yielded their poisoned fruit. The people of Akká began to show open hostility and ill will towards the Bahais, and this attitude caused Baha'u'lláh to close his doors to both friend and foe, to both Bahais and members of the city of Akká. Baha'u'lláh stopped allowing anyone to enter his presence. The situation became so tense that Abdul Baha left the Hani Avamid, where he was living for the last 3 years, and moved back into the house of Udi Khamar so he could be close to Baha'u'lláh if Baha'u'lláh needed him. And he moved to be a support to his family. That is how tense the situation got. And of course, the Azalis crept into the community, like you see here, this black ink creeping into this glass of water. The Azalis immediately exploited Baha'u'llah's seclusion, turning the situation to their own wicked advantage. The The Baha'i community was temporarily severed from Baha'u'llah's guiding hand, and the Azalis were able to mix in with the faithful believers as they continued to calumniate Baha'u'llah. And then they started forging Baha'u'llah's tablets. This is a tablet. This is what a tablet that is not illuminated would look like from Baha'u'llah's handwriting. This is the type that they would forge, adding words, changing the message, putting themselves in it. Mirza Reza Quli had some of Baha'u'llah's tablets, the new addition to the Azalis, the third one, who was excommunicated by Baha'u'llah, and Sayyid Muhammad had the experience of, oh God, what an evil man. He had the experience of forging Baha'u'llah's handwriting. So this is an experience he had acquired during the most great separation in Edirne and Istanbul. And so together, Mirza Reza Quli and Sayyid Muhammad Esfahani corrupted the text of Baha'u'llah's writings, making additions to them that rendered them heretical against Islam. Oh man, that is so sick. But that's not it, though. That's not it. That's not where it stops. They corrupted Baha'u'llah's writings to make them so they would look like Baha'u'llah's handwriting. But then the message was corrupted to sound against Islam, antisocial, and sort of revolutionary. Sayyid Muhammad made Baha'u'llah sound like a fanatical Shia, the sworn enemies of the Sunnis, majority Sunnis of Akká. And they distributed these forgeries widely in the city to rise up the Muslims of Akká. And then, of course, they went to the Sunnis themselves and decided that they wanted to be Sunni. So the layers of evil are like a rotten onion. Like you go to one level to another level to another level to another level, and it just keeps getting worse, really. At this point, Mirza Reza Quli and his sister Badri Jan, one of Mirza Yahya's wives, who was estranged from Mirza Yahya, they had both been cast out of the community. Mirza Yahya's wife number X and Mirza Reza Quli, her brother, Badri Jan and Mirza Reza Quli. So because they'd been cast out of the Baha'i community, they began to claim, along with Sayyid Muhammad and Kashkullah, that they had left the Baha'i faith voluntarily and were now devoted Sunni Muslims, telling the mullahs of Akká, we used to be Babis, but now we are better informed about the truth of religion. We desire to become Sunni Muslims. Please, please, please. We are no friends of Baha'u'llah, who is your deadly enemy. These Babis are spies and are always plotting against the true religion. The pilgrims who come from Persia are in reality fanatic Shia, forever working against the Sunnis. Now you can imagine the tensions growing from each of these actions. And there are now 5 Azalis, because you had Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani, Kashkullah, then you have, what's his name again? Mirza Reza Quli and Badri Jan. So yeah, there's 5 of them now, and they're disseminating all this stuff. It's just, they're adding fuel to the fire, and they don't have no idea what's going to happen to them. And what's going to happen to them is that 3 of them are going to get murdered on the 22nd of January, 1872. So the day before, on the 21st of January, 1872, Baha'u'llah reveals a prophecy regarding the murder of the 3 Azalis. And in the picture here, you have the same image before and after the murder. On the 21st of January, 1872, when anything could still be saved. And then on the right, picture in red, nothing can ever be the same. Soon after the fire tablet, Baha'u'llah revealed a significant unpublished and untranslated tablet in which he clearly prophesies the appearance of a great affliction, describing it as an ocean of tribulation surging with billowing waves, engulfing the ark of the cause of God. The prophecies in this tablet were fulfilled less than 24 hours later. Okay. Before 22nd of January, 1872, the possibility of eternal damnation. After the Most Great Separation, Bahais who followed Baha'u'lláh and Azalis who followed Mirza Yahya did not associate. When they had been sent into exile, the Ottoman authorities had sent 2 Azalis with Baha'u'lláh to Akká, his place of banishment, and 4 Bahais with Mirza Yahya to be exiled to Famagusta, Cyprus, his place of exile. The mixture was volatile in Akká, where the Azalis did everything they could to undermine Baha'u'lláh to such an extent that 7 misguided Bahais decided to kill them, even if it would invoke Baha'u'llah's wrath and cause their expulsion from the Baha'i community. They knowingly sacrificed their spiritual afterlife in the name of revenge, as one of the murderers told Lady Bloomfield years later. If these spies and traitors kill us, then we shall have sacrificed our lives to protect the holy ones. If we kill them, then we shall have delivered the Baha'is from their most pernicious enemies. Baha'u'llah will excommunicate us. That is terrible. We shall then have sacrificed our souls. But this evil shall be destroyed. It shall be destroyed. On the 22nd of January, 1872, the murder. Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani, Kashkula, and Mirza Reza Kuli had run such an effective campaign of misinformation, opposition, and rabble-rousing that they fell victim to their own success. They were murdered on the 22nd of January, 1872, by 7 Baha'is, brought to the breaking point by their incessant and vicious intrigues. The 7 Baha'is who committed the heinous act were Agha Muhammad Ibrahimi Nazir, who had already expressed this desire to Baha'u'lláh, if you remember. Mirza Hussein-i Najjar, our beloved, faithful Agha Hussein-i Ashchi. He was part of the murderers. Mirza Jafar, Ustad Ahmad-i Najjar, Agha Muhammad Ali-i Salmani, the barber, and no, maybe not. I strike that. Might be someone else. And Ustad Abdul Karim Kharat. Immediately after the murder, the mob. The sound of pistol shots near the government house, followed by shouts and yelling, brought Sali Pasha, the governor, out of his house. Pandemonium broke out in Akká after the murder, and everyone rose up. The governor, the chief of police, the troops, the population of Akká, young and old, assembled into a full-blown mob. Akká was in such a state of turmoil, it was as if it had been invaded by another country. Armed with stones, sticks, swords, rifles, the mob headed straight for Baha'u'llah's house in the home of Udi Hamar and arrested all the Baha'is they could find on the way. 22 January to July 1872, the aftermath of the murders. This is a map showing, it's an aerial photograph showing all of the different places that are in this story here. We have the governorate courtroom and the governorate at the top, the Mosque of Al-Jazar on the left, the Madrisi, the mosque school right below, the barrack square, and the citadel. It's meant when you're reading the chronology for you to refer back to that so you see where you are in all these different places, but we're not going to be able to go back and forth here. So the mob arrived in front of the house of Udi Hamar an hour after sunset on the 22nd of January, 1872 on tenterhooks. Baha'u'lláh was dictating tablets when the governor, followed by his troops with drawn sword, surrounded the house, and drowned out by the shout and clamor of the large crowd, Said Beg, an Ottoman official, entered the Biruni of the house of Udi Hamar, accompanied by Baha'u'llah's neighbor Ilyas Aboud, whose worst fears had just realized. He had been scared from the beginning about these Persian exiles, his neighbors. They asked Abdul Baha and 3 other Baha'is present to accompany them to the governorate, requesting Baha'u'lláh join them as well. Abdul-Baha went to Baha'u'lláh in the inner part of the house, the Andaruni, and presented him with their request. When Baha'u'lláh came out of the Andaruni, night had fallen, and a man lit their way with a lantern. Baha'u'lláh left his house, walking with such discernible power that a resident of Akká who witnessed the scene became a Baha'i that very night. The night of 22 January 1872, the interrogation of Baha'u'lláh. This is the inside of the governorate in Akká, looking across to the room where Baha'u'lláh was interrogated. When Baha'u'lláh entered the governorate, Sali Pasha, the governor, Salim Mulki, the head of the secretariat, and other officials present stood before him. Baha'u'lláh took a seat at the front of the room in complete silence until the commandant abruptly attacked him. Is it proper that some of your followers should act in such a manner? Unimpressed, Baha'u'lláh immediately replied, if one of your soldiers were to commit a reprehensible act, would you be held responsible and be punished in his place? The Ottoman officials asked Baha'u'lláh to state his name twice, and when they asked it a third time with more respect, Baha'u'lláh consented to answer, my name is Baha'u'lláh, and my country is Noor. Be appraised of it. Baha'u'lláh turned to the Mufti and rebuked him before reprimanding the entire gathering assembled at the governorate in such vehement and exalted language, quoting verses from the Suri Muluk, that no one dared respond to him. Then Baha'u'lláh rose and left the interrogation for another room where he would be made to wait nearly 4 hours. Just want to make a small parenthesis here and remind you that this is taking place at a moment when Baha'u'lláh has made his public proclamation to the world, to at least to 5 kings and queens, to 2 prime ministers. And it is in between that proclamation to the kings and rulers and the tablet to the ruler of his own native land and the summons to the kings and monarchs in the Kitabi Akdas that this is taking place. It's in between these two. And Baha'u'lláh is in this in the mode of proclamation. And so he is at the apex of his ministry. And they are treating him like a common criminal. And so the way that Baha'u'lláh responds is like a king speaking to his subjects, because that's exactly the tone of the Suri Muluk and the Lahi Malikiye and the Lahi Sultan and the Lahi Pap and the Suri Muluk and the Lahi Fuad and the Suri Rais and the Lahi Rais and all of those. And it's really amazing when you think about it, because the way that he is speaking to these people, the way he is behaving is exactly the way that the revelation reads. It reads like a king speaking to his subjects. And when he's addressing the Mufti, it reads like a king addressing his subjects. And I just think that that's so incredible that we get to have testimony about that. So the 22nd of January, that same night, a lot of things happened that same night. Baha'u'lláh and Abdul-Baha are imprisoned again. This is a view of the Hani Avamid, not the Hani Avamid. The Hani Avamid is the caravanserai in Akká where Baha'u'lláh was kept in custody for 1 night during the interrogation, and it's in the north. Okay, I'm just going to do this. I said I wasn't going to, but where is the Hani Avamid? Oh. Okay, I don't think it's on. Oh, right here, maybe on the bottom. Anyway, this is a beautiful picture. The Ottoman officials detained Abdul-Baha's half-brother, Muhammad Ali, Mirza Rajan, and Baha'u'llah's faithful brother, Agha Mirza Muhammad Kuli, and banned entry or exit from a Russian steamer that was anchored off the coast of Akká. So the situation was so tense that they banned entry to a steamer anchored off the coast of Akká. Also, they arrested all the Baha'is they could find. 4 hours after sunset. And around that time of year, 4 hours after sunset, it would have been around 9:30 p.m. Baha'u'lláh, together with Muhammad Ali, were led to a room in the Hani Shaviridi, the northern caravanserai in Akká, and an extension to the prison. Abdul Baha was thrown into prison in the Liman, next door to where Baha'u'lláh was detained, and was chained for the first night in a long, pitch black room with a low, vaulted stone ceiling, extremely damp, with slime-covered walls and a muddy, sticky floor. No outside light could come in except through the door when it was opened, and so it was pitch black. The next day, Abdul Baha was allowed to rejoin Baha'u'lláh, and if that description reminds you of the Siachal, it's because it's almost identical to the Siachal, except for two small details. One, it's much smaller than the Siachal, and two, it's much it's on the ground floor, I think, or just a few steps down. And the Siachal was 3 flights of stairs down because it was an old reservoir for the public bath. Agha Mirza Muhammad Kuli was detained elsewhere, and Mirza Agha Jan was allowed to return to the house and bring what Baha'u'lláh would need for the night, after which he was locked up in the governorate jail. Still later that same night, Asiye Khanum sees Abdul Baha in chains. This is a very unusual photograph of the house of Udi Khamar from the historical development of Genoa Square in Accra, Israel, from the 7th century to the present day. It's a thesis by Amy Suzanne Hollander. It's an amazing picture. The first night, while Abdul Baha was in chains in the Liman, Ottoman officials arrived and demanded from him the keys, saying they needed to search Baha'u'llah's house for weapons. Asiye Khanum and Bahiye Khanum were alone at home, the men having all been arrested, and Abdul Baha absolutely refused to give them the keys in an attitude of protection that he had shown when they had first arrived on the 30th of August, 1868, and he absolutely refused to let his mother and sister be disembarked on the backs of men, found chairs for them. Very protective, always. He agreed to accompany them so that they would not frighten his mother and sister. Abdul Baha was forced to walk from the prison in the northeast of Akká to the house of Udi Khamar in the western part of the city with chains around his neck in public. A total distance of almost a mile. When they reached the house, Abdul Baha tried to hide the chains from his mother, but of course his mother saw them and wept bitterly. So 3 days later, the 25th of January, 1872, Baha'u'lláh is released. This is a very lightly colorized photograph of Subhi Pasha, known as Abdul Latif Sufi Pasha, who was the Governor General of Syria from 1871 to 1873. Salih Pasha, the Governor Mutasarrif of Akká, called Subhi Pasha the Governor General Vali of Syria, and apprised him of the situation and the actions he had taken. Subhi Pasha reprimanded the governor of Akká for his treatment of Baha'u'lláh, and the very next day, Salih Pasha transferred Baha'u'lláh to better accommodations, where Baha'u'lláh spent the nights of the 23rd and the 24th of January, 1872. On the afternoon of the third day, 25th of January, 1872, Baha'u'lláh, Abdul Baha, Muhammad Kuli, and Agha Mirza Muhammad Kuli were once again summoned to the governorate. Baha'u'lláh was by now suffering from a slight fever and reproached Salih Pasha for having acted against the edicts of God. The governor informed Baha'u'lláh that they were free to return home. And as Baha'u'lláh rose to leave, so did the government officials, humbly apologizing for their behavior. Okay, we have 2 short stories left to finish for today. The first is the aftermath of the crisis. In 2 separate tablets, Baha'u'lláh spoke of the behavior of the believers as the only thing capable of shaming him, comparing it to his captivity. My captivity cannot harm me. That which can harm me is the conduct of those who love me, and yet perpetrate what causeth my heart and my pen to groan. And in another tablet, my captivity can bring on me no shame. That which can make me ashamed is the conduct of such of my followers as profess to love me, yet in fact follow the evil one. The population of Akká had been so misinformed by the Azalis that they were already ill-disposed towards the Bahais. But the murders fired an animosity towards all the followers of Baha'u'lláh. The Bahais found themselves openly insulted, accused of immorality, accused of godlessness, accused of atheism, accused of terrorism, accused of heresy. And their children were pursued, berated, and pelted with stones. Ilyas Aboud, Baha'u'llah's next door neighbor, was now so terrified of Baha'u'lláh that he reinforced the partition that separated his house from Baha'u'llah's. This partition will soon be demolished in a wonderful story we're going to start with tomorrow. It's going to be so nice to hear about that tomorrow. I know today was hard because it was all about the murder. But so the last part of today is 6 months and 7 years. The Hani Avamid, where the 16 Bahais were imprisoned for 6 months in the story below. The 7 Bahais who committed the heinous murders were imprisoned for 7 years. After the murders, 16 innocent Bahais were rounded up to be imprisoned, which included Haji Ali Askari Tabrizi, who was overlooked. And demanded to be incarcerated with his brethren. After 6 days, they were moved to the Hani Avamid, where they were confined for 6 months, during which they were closely watched and observed and treated harshly by Ottoman artillerymen. Before their murder, the Azalis had poisoned the minds of many people against the Bahais, including the artillerymen who were now watching over Bahai prisoners. As the men watched their prisoners, well, that happened what often happens when pure-hearted people spend a little bit of time with enkindled Bahais. Their prejudice and animosity give way to admiration for the Bahais' ever-present gentleness and exemplary behavior. Eventually, these same guards expressed their disgust at the Ottoman officials who adamantly refused to free them. The Bahais planted flowers in the yard. Oh, so cute. The Bahais planted flowers in the yard and kept the Hani Avamid neat and tidy, each one taking a turn for cooking and cleaning, and they entertained the formerly hostile artillerymen and policemen for tea in the afternoons. That's so Persian. Not too long before their release, some of the prisoners were allowed to leave the Hani Avamid to visit the believers and enter the presence of Baha'u'lláh. And now, this is just a teaser. This is tomorrow's opening, the wedding of Abdul Baha and Munire Khanum. I am so looking forward to that. Love that story. I could listen to it all day. So, we're going to stop recording in 1 minute after I thank our sponsors. Of course, number one, the Firm Foundation Academy for organizing this wonderful summer where we can be together every day. It's so wonderful, so inspiring to listen to the life of Baha'u'lláh and the Bab, and soon the life of Abdul Baha. I want to also thank Desert Rose Baha'i Institute for making this possible, and our Clearwater friends for always being there when we need them. Thank you.